Alright, so last time I ended with the idea that the Montreal Screwjob may have been one big hoax. After all, there is some precedent to suggest that the Screwjob being fake is a very real likelihood. So after 20 years, let's look into the possibility. Because today, one more time, Dave knows the Montreal Screwjob. Now, I'd like to remind everyone that wrestling stories, especially about the Screwjob, are loaded with contradictory information, which serves as a bit of a red flag all by itself, but I will get more into that later. Wrestling is a shady business that's all about deception, so this speculation is based off of rumors and reports. So if you heard something to the contrary, just know that there are reports that may conflict with what you've already heard. This is all just speculatory, so don't start screaming in the comments if you heard something different, okay? Okay, so the idea of the Screwjob being fake is a popular hypothesis, with many wrestlers even stating that they think the whole Montreal Screwjob thing is just the biggest trick that wrestling has ever pulled. I am not completely sold that it was, but I am not entirely convinced that it wasn't either. Nevertheless, let's look at some of the logic behind this rumor. First, as I mentioned last time, Bret Hart had creative control in his contract when it came to dealing with his exit from the company. And even before that, Bret had a very close creative relationship with Vince McMahon, and the two worked together a lot when it came to crafting story arcs. So with Bret Hart having, in writing, creative control in his contract, Bret could have sued Vince McMahon for a lot of money. However, despite all this animosity, Bret never actually filed this lawsuit specifically. Many speculate that this is because Bret was actually exercising his creative control and that the Screwjob was his final creation for the WWF all along. And a big reason why many people go along with this is that a lot of it fits together way too conveniently, while other parts of it just don't line up at all. For example, Shawn Michaels is the perfect guy to be the villain in this story against Bret. With their in-ring and backstage heat, you couldn't pick a better foil for Bret if you were going to make the story up. Which makes it all the more interesting that the two had a match together in the first place, considering that both men were heels at the time. Now yes, Bret was a face in Canada, which is where the match took place, but still, that does seem a bit odd, doesn't it? Now, the reason why I'm not totally buying this as proof is that this means that a lot of their backstage fighting between both of them has to be fake as well. Sure, it is possible that all those years of real-life hate were exaggerated, but why would they fake it unless they knew Bret was going to leave the company years later? Now, yes, it could have been done just to sell their on-camera feud and therefore just conveniently worked out for the Screwjob, but still, that does seem like a bit of a stretch. And also, their backstage beef has been confirmed by others. Now sure, these people could have been lying, but how would it be possible that no one spilled the truth by now? Especially with many ex-WWF employees who left with sour grapes. If the backstage heat was fake, it would have to be an amazing performance, and it would require that everyone keep their mouth shut. Forever. And yes, I do think that it would have to be fake backstage heat in order for the Screwjob to work, because if Shawn Michaels really hated Bret, then why wouldn't he go along with Bret's master plan for leaving the company in a big way when it would only serve to vilify him to many for years to come? That would be a huge sacrifice to make for someone that you don't even like. But conflicting stories in general is one of the other reasons that many people think the Screwjob is all a work in the first place. There are interviews out there where different people all claim to be the person to come up with the idea for the Screwjob. There have been reports that everyone from Jim Cornette to Triple H to Vince Russo all came up with the plan. Even when it comes to small details like who told Earl Hebner to call for the bell, interviews are not only different, but the same people have even given different answers. When too many conflicting stories happen, it's usually a sign that the truth is none of the above. Another major issue that people have is with the alleged backstage punch that happened. As the story goes, Bret Hart couldn't wrestle for WCW right away because he had a broken hand, a hand that was supposedly broken by punching Vince McMahon in the face for real after the Screwjob. The reasons why many people think that the punch never actually happened are many. One is because the documentary was filming Hart's life at the time, but the punch was conveniently not recorded by anyone. Plus, there is footage of the two men arguing together immediately after the match, but as the story goes, after that, Vince McMahon locked himself in his office. Vince was then urged to apologize to Bret, and that's when the punch happened. The question is, why didn't Bret just punch him right away? Also, in the arena, some have wondered if Vince McMahon would even have an office to begin with. Sure, there was a room that he did business from, but this was not his own personal building, this was a sports arena. Would he even be able to lock the door to this room? And even if he did, Why couldn't Bret just kick it in if he was that mad? Also, others have pointed out that Vince's bruise looked like makeup. People have also claimed that there was no swelling at all, just a slight discoloration. There are two problems that people have with this, and both have to do with Bret's skill as a fighter. Some say that Bret, being as skilled at punching as he was, would definitely cause swelling if he were to punch an old man. And others have also pointed out that Bret probably wouldn't have broken his hand from punching Vince because he's just too skilled and he wouldn't make that kind of mistake. Now my issue with that is, this is Vince McMahon after all. He took a headbutt from Kevin Owens. Now this is 20 years ago. I'm pretty sure if they wanted to sell the idea of a punch, Vince is just crazy enough to actually let Bret do it. But hey, that's just my thinking. Now there is also the conspiracy theory floating around out there that people think Bret was sent to WCW specifically to destroy the company from within. And by not wrestling right away because of his hand, it was just step one in the destruction of WCW. However, I don't think this is true, because if it was, then why did it take over a decade before Bret returned to WWE TV? What, just to really sell the idea? If the plan was to destroy WCW, then Bret should have been welcomed back with open arms as soon as the mission was accomplished. Now, I could understand it more if the plan was just to get a kayfabe story over in order for Vince McMahon to make up for ending kayfabe by admitting that wrestling was sports entertainment. However, 12 years is still a really long time to commit to this. But yet again, there is still the speculation that some people have that the Screwjob was a work, but then after Owens' passing, real-life beef between Vince and Bret occurred, thus turning their fake behind-the-scenes feud into a real one. That I'm not so sure about, but it does make sense as a possibility. Another major thing that people say is that both Vince and Bret are just too smart to ever be put in this situation. Remember, the circumstances behind the Screwjob are pretty peculiar. Bret was offered a 20-year contract, then had it taken back. And the day that was chosen to be Bret's last day with the company just happened to be a major pay-per-view in Canada of all places. Why wasn't Bret let go right away? Or why didn't they wait till the end of the month? Why wasn't that specific day? Furthermore, reports state that Vince McMahon began rethinking the new contract with Bret following the King of the Ring, which was in June. So why would he then give Bret the title in the first place at SummerSlam if he was so worried about Bret taking the title to WCW? Just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Also, some have stated that Bret is just too smart to fall for such a thing unless it was a work. Bret would obviously know that something was up if he was holding the title going into Survivor Series on his last night. He would expect to lose the title before that ever happened. So many claim that both men are just too bright to ever be put in this perfect storm that needed to happen for the Montreal Screwjob to take place. Finally, the biggest piece of the puzzle is the Wrestling with Shadows documentary itself. People pointed out that it is pretty interesting that a film crew just happened to be filming during the time of the Screwjob. Vince McMahon controls everything and would never allow this to happen unless something was up. Now the counter to this is the fact that the filmmaker who did the documentary has worked on other projects before and since. So if this was all one big work, his reputation would definitely be on the line, and that would be a very risky endeavor for him to do. Not saying this couldn't happen, just saying that it would be a really big risk, and he is definitely a legitimate filmmaker and not a made-up person. Oh, and there are also rumors that Vince McMahon tried to prevent the documentary from being released, but ultimately the film was released anyway. What I find interesting is that McMahon supposedly never loses lawsuits. So if the film was released, either that means that Vince McMahon in some way allowed it to be released, or his claim about never losing lawsuits is less than accurate. But also, if this was all a work and Vince trying to block the film was fake, then why didn't they fully commit on Bret's end too and have him fake a lawsuit against Vince McMahon over the creative control violation in his contract? In the end, I still think the Screwjob was legitimate, but I'm definitely not sure. Part of me does think that not only was this Bret's farewell to the WWF, but it was also a grand send-off to kayfabe by pulling a big final stunt to fool the people just one more time. Doing something unprecedented just in order to get people interested in wrestling once again. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and this has been Dave Knows.